Good morning. Welcome back. Brian here again with another installment in our Going to the Source series. Today we are taking a look at our third and final installment in Captain John Smith's list of recommendations. Is a list of such necessaries, of course, pretty verbose title, but basically everything in addition to the clothes and military equipment we've already looked at, everything else Smith thinks you need for service in Virginia. Okay, so diving right in, taking a little bit closer look at the rest of Captain John Smith's list of recommendations. As we've touched on before, we've already talked about his recommendations for the kind of clothing a man should have in Virginia, and we've taken a look at the sort of military hardware that Smith recommends for service in Virginia. But it's quite an extensive list. There's a lot we haven't covered yet, so we're going to take a little bit of a look at the rest of the things that he thinks a person bound for Virginia should have, and beyond that, the cost of getting all of that stuff, acquiring it, getting it here, and getting that person across the ocean as well, because of course this is not going to be an inexpensive endeavor. Now, it is worth noting that when we previously looked at his in our previous videos at his recommendations for clothing, again, that's clothing for a man. The military equipment, likewise, is clothing for one man. Some of the rest of the sections on his list are not organized necessarily the same way. And so here's an example, for instance, of, again, what he's saying one person should probably have. He's saying such things as men ought to provide when they go to Virginia. And, for instance, it says a pair of canvas sheets. Pretty basic, pretty straightforward linen canvas sheets. 7 ells of canvas to make a bed and bolster to be filled in Virginia, serving for 2 men. And this is something we see pretty consistent in the time period. You just don't often see people getting a bed to themselves, especially in what is early on a fairly communal sort of living situation. But the beds are going to be sized accordingly. But this specifies, this is the material that you're going to be using once you get there to create a bed and bolster for 2 men. 5 ells of coarse canvas to make a bed at sea for 2 men. So you've got your bedding aboard the ship. You don't have to worry about reusing that once you get here. You got ideally fresh bedding for once you get here. And then 1 coarse rug at sea for 2 men. So the bedding for the crossing, and the bedding for once you arrive here. But again, that's under a list of things that he's saying, a man should provide for himself. There's bedding for 2 people. Victuals for a year for a man, and so after the rate for more. So again, here's the food to feed 1 person, essentially, for a whole year. And he says 8 bushels of meal, 2 bushels of peas, 2 bushels of oatmeal, a gallon of aquavitae, which is kind of a collective term for stronger alcohols at the time. We see it sometimes used very specifically. We see it sometimes used in a more vague sense, but think something along the lines of whiskey. A gallon of oil and 2 gallons of vinegar. And of course, this is not just for cooking and that sort of thing, but also for the preservation of food. It's worth noting that just that, and this is not your entire diet. This is just the stuff that's going to actually last. There's more you're going to have to acquire once you're here. You notice there's no mention of meat on here, for instance. They've already got livestock introduced and agriculture underway in Virginia by the time Smith publishes this list in 1624. But again, it's basically just grain and then your aquavitae, your oil and your vinegar that he's recommending here, and that is still totaling up to, let's see here, just over £5, which, that's a substantial amount of money. £5 yearly income in England would qualify you for, or at least a net worth of £5 per year in England would qualify you to vote in Parliament. So this is, a substantial expenditure just to feed a person for a year. He then jumps from food to tools, and he says 2 hand saws, a whip saw, set and filed with box, file, and rest. So not only the equipment, but the equipment to maintain the equipment. 2 hammers, 3 shovels, 2 spades, 2 augers, 6 chisels, 2 pursers or piercers stocked, 3 gimlets, 2 hatchets, 2 froes to cleave pails, 2 handbills, 1 grindstone, 2 pickaxes, and nails of all sorts. And again, giving the value for all of this as you go. I mean, every bit of this is representing expenditure. The nails are one of those. He's so very specific in some areas, and then he leaves us kind of wondering in other areas. And the nails is one of the frustrations for us, is he says nails of all sorts to the value of £2. How many nails does that get us? Now, again, a yearly net worth of £5 per annum is going to qualify you in England to be able to vote in Parliament. £2 worth of nails. That should be a tremendous volume of nails, but he doesn't actually specify whether the number of nails or the volume of a container that you would get filled with nails. He just nails of all sorts. And so we're left to wonder, really all sorts? We're even looking at like finishing tax for furniture here, Captain Smith, or is it just for construction? So some areas he's very specific, and some areas he leaves us wondering a little bit. But again, this is no small expenditure, so tremendous amount of hardware. We then jump over, and he says he adds some additional tools, and here he says, tools for a family of 6 persons, and so after the rate for more. And this includes 5 broad hoes, 5 narrow hoes, 2 broad axes, 5 felling axes, and 2 steel hand saws. So, we're kind of going from, on the one set of tools, building, construction, creating a place for you to live once you get there, to now with this other set of tools, agriculture. How do we, once we've got a place built, how do we settle, work the land, and support ourselves off of it? But it is interesting that he's kind of looking at it initially from the point of view of a single person, and now he's looking at it as a family of 6. And along that vein, he then goes on to household wares. And so again, household implements for a family of 6 persons, and so for more or less thereafter. That's going to include an iron pot, a kettle, which again could be iron or copper, that sort of thing, a large frying pan, 2 skillets, 1 spit, and then platters, dishes, spoons, all of wood. And again, for a family of 6 or so. So again, no small volume of eating ware there, and all of that, even just the kitchen stuff, totaling up to well over £1. So again, you're dropping some pretty serious money here. It says for sugar, spice, and fruit, and at sea for 6 men, they're spending 12 shillings, so the over £0.5 on things that, are they absolutely necessary? No, but it's things that people want. And the same sort of thing today, if we were going to say, what would we prioritize? Yeah, we're going to need some necessities, but some of us want things that are going to make our time more enjoyable as well. They're doing the exact same thing 400 years ago. So sugars, spices, and fruit. So then he goes on to very handily give us a total of the cost for all of this. And he says, so the full charge after this rate for each person will amount about the sum of 12 pounds, 10 shillings, and 10 pence. This is a substantial expenditure already. I mean, if you were looking at, let's say, 10 pounds per annum in England at the time, I mean, this is now a level of wealth that is equivalent to some of the lower gentry. So again, this is no mean feat to acquire all of this. And the passage itself for each man, just getting a person, passage on a ship from England to Virginia, is an additional 6 pounds. And then the fraught of these provisions for a man will be about half a ton. So basically the volumetric burden on the ship to take all of this stuff is going to be about half a ton, which at that time is a volumetric measure, and again pretty substantial. And he says that's going to run you nearly a pound and right about a pound and a half, pound 10 shillings. And so you've got the cost of acquiring the stuff, the cost of freighting the stuff to Virginia, and the cost of the man's passage to Virginia. And he says, so the whole charge will amount to about 20 pounds. This is again serious money, which is why we tend to see less often individuals just uprooting themselves and coming to Virginia. Where are most individuals who are in need of a fresh start going to come up with that kind of money? If you've got that kind of money, are you going to want to uproot yourself and go halfway around the world into, even by 1624, what is still very much a wilderness frontier? And it's why so many of the people coming here are being sponsored, whether it's through the Virginia Company of London, or it's through one of the other merchant houses that kind of steps in once the Virginia Company ultimately is dissolved, or even through private investor. If you've got some of the big name investors in the Virginia Company who've been provided land grants and they're now sending their own indentures, their own employees to come work those lands that they've been granted for them. This is the much more common scenario for getting these folks here, because again, I mean that's a ton of money. Somebody else sponsoring you, getting you there, and then hopefully getting that value and more back out of you in terms of labor is a lot more common. And of course, that's just for the first year. The clothing that we talk about, most of that by the end of a year is going to have been worn and damaged and repaired and worn to bits and is probably going to need to be replaced again. The bedding, same thing. You're laundering that pretty heavily. That may all need to be replaced again. The food, obviously you've consumed it. That's all going to need to be replaced. The tools and equipment hopefully have held up, but things like nails might have to be replaced if you're continuing to repair or build and expand and that kind of thing. Hopefully you've still got, for instance, when we go back to the military equipment list, hopefully you've still got some gunpowder left at the end of the year. But who knows if it's been a dangerous year in conflict with the powers and that sort of thing, you may need to replace your munitions as well. So this is just the expenses for the first year. And hopefully years after will not be as expensive, but it's not like it's a one-time investment. Money's going to continue to need to be spent. And this is, I think, sometimes one of the misconceptions of the early colonial era when we start looking at exploration and colonization in the Americas. You don't have people just striking off into the unknown and homesteading on their own. You need a tremendous amount of support. Even if your goal ultimately is self-sufficiency, which most of these instances, and not just for the English here at Jamestown, but the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, the Swedes, the English, all of them who are coming over here, most of these colonial instances, the goal is not necessarily a self-sufficient colony full of families. Most of them are early on for-profit ventures. But even if your goal was self-sufficiency, you're going to need so much support for so long until you can build up the infrastructure necessary to be able to support yourself. And then even then, if you're growing all your own food and this sort of thing, okay, you can feed yourself. Are you also able to make all your own tools and all your own hardware and all your own clothing? Probably not. I mean, you're going to need everything that's available in England to duplicate all of those same resources here. So even once the colonies are well established and up and running, we still see a tremendous amount of this coming over and over and over again. The tools, the hardware, the manufactured goods, the cloth for clothing continue to be shipped over. And so this expenditure made over and over again. So, we've got, again, such a fantastic source here from Captain John Smith. He gives us that great insight. In a rarity, gives us such an itemized list and the expense of all of these things to give us such a great insight into kind of the staggering task that is set before a company like the Virginia Company or individuals trying to fund themselves coming to Virginia to come up with that kind of funding, not just to get the people here, but then to sustain it. So again, this is why this list is one of our favorite primary sources, because it just gives us a tremendous amount of detailed information and a much better idea of how these folks are managing all of this. So we hope you folks enjoyed this one today. We'd like to thank you once again for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, and the like, leave them below. Give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.